Welcome to Comic Books and You. Today we are going to be covering Nyobi Outbreak number 1. This is one of the ongoing Nyobi series. You've got Outbreak, you've got Birthright, you've got Nyobi and Pinguina that's going to release fairly soon, and Origins. So there's multiple Nyobi stories going on at the same time, not completely linked with each other, so it's a bit jarring every once in a while when you start reading it. Here we've got a nice collection of the different covers that were available for this book. There's even a few more here that I haven't put there. As you know, I'm not a huge fan of variant covers, but here we've got a nice assortment of things from all sorts of different artists, which is a very interesting thing. But I would probably prefer to have to just buy, a book and maybe some prints rather than multiple books. But that might just be me. While we had already met Nyobi in the Origins book earlier, here she's more or less working directly for the government, and with a pretty good handle over her powers. She seems to be able to teleport and open those gates just about as well as she can, and move all sorts of things through it, including other people. So it's pretty interesting how it is being used here. Her current job seems to be to bring dangerous G-Noms, basically mutants, to justice, and to also protect them from themselves. I think that's a bit more interesting in terms of the character trying to protect other peoples from what they could do to themselves, because in the end, society doesn't seem to be enjoying the G-Noms all that much. She seems to be pretty decent at fighting in general in this one as well, so a big improvement compared to how she was in Origins 1. Nyobi's backup in this particular issue, Sybil, that we have also seen in the Origin book, and Catcall, who's a brand new character, I think, for this particular book. Sybil still has a strong telekinetic, telepathic powers. She can read minds if she puts her hand on you. Pretty useful overall, especially in a police kind of work. While Catcall seems to have super agility and super strength, which is perfectly reasonable for me in terms of powers you can have. Sometimes you just don't need more than that. Our main bad guy, at least in this issue, is Cinder, who's a leader of an anti-normie protest for G-Nom Riots, and it's one of those kind of protests that goes a little bit too far, as you can see at the bottom there. Actually, she seems to be working for the boss at Drake Tech, who is pushing for more anti-G-Nom and anti-establishment protests for some reason. Generally nefarious. We're just not quite sure what. Cinder's able to fly, and she's able to generate fire. She basically has those fire wings in the back, and she can shoot just beams of flame to people. So that makes it rather dangerous. But she's a pretty interesting, even though she's a bit one-dimensional in this particular book. We're also introduced to Keats, which is another G-Nom, dressed as a creepy goth chick. She tries to hide that she's a G-Nom, and I'm not sure she does a very good job at it. She is protesting for G-Nom Riots in support of Cinder, basically acting as a useful idiot in this particular situation. She seems to have the power to make people really, really sick, but we don't learn the extent of her powers in this issue. You'll have to wait to issue 2 for that, which we'll probably review next week. Our story begins at the Drake Tech head office, where Kidman Drake, who seems to be the boss of Drake Tech, is meeting up with Cinder, telling her to kick it up a notch to 10 in regards to their manipulation of the public and the G-Nom rioting. Cinder does just that this evening, basically haranguing the assembled mob to get them in a rioting mood, pointing out that she was labeled as a terrorist simply for how she was born. But honestly, I don't really buy it. If you're starting to burn things down, you're a terrorist, not because of how you were born, but because of how you're acting. Riot police starts to show up and to disperse the crowd, but they're having very little success until Nyobi shows up to help. Well, she's there to help apprehend Cinder, not to help with the riots, but one could help with the other. Cinder decries Nyobi's role as a government agent, basically, and Nyobi tells Cinder that it's because of G-Noms like her that the others are feared. And I would kind of understand the point of view of Nyobi, and the two of them start fighting. Nyobi dodges a few attacks from Cinder. She has a very good handle of the teleport power. The problem lies when, after knocking Cinder down, Nyobi's on the ground, and she gets hit by a few of the rioters, including a nice little brick on the head. Or maybe that's a stack of paper. I'm pretty sure that's a brick. And she's grabbed by the rioters, who are led by Keats. Thankfully for Nyobi, she calls in the reinforcement with Sybil and Catcall coming through a portal. And Catcall just starts manhandling the poor rioters, who have not much chance against her. And Sybil basically smothers Cinder, preventing her from having any fire, and takes her down fairly quickly. Unfortunately for them, Nyobi doesn't want her to kill Cinder, so she starts limiting her powers a little bit and tries to read Cinder's mind, but that gives her enough time to light back up and run away. The riot is more or less contained at that point. The police is doing their job properly. Keats and her boyfriend, I can't say if it's her boyfriend or just a boyfriend, try to run off into the web, which is the big link of alleyways that are throughout the city center in Port Hope, where this story is going on. Unfortunately for Keith and her friend, two regular cops, not equipped in full riot gear, just in regular cop gear, try to stop them. The man decides to cooperate and behaves like someone really should when you're about to get arrested. Keats get rather irate, start spouting some standard run-of-the-mill ACAB bullshit, and turns her powers on. This leads a male cop puking black goo and a female cop to turn into some kind of crystal. Keith and her friend run away from that, and this is how this particular bit of the story ends. There's a few things I'll probably need to discuss here in terms of pacing, but as far as a book goes, it has a beginning, a middle, and a end. That's a very good start, and it gives us a nice idea of where we're at in the setting and what's going on at this point in time. There's a few things that are missing that would be pretty important for people to understand what is going on. But the story itself, the dialogue, and everything that's going on in it works perfectly fine for what it is. This is a bit of an odd case. I got actually a foil cover of this because of an ordering error by the creator. It's not something that I would normally be hunting for. It's also signed. Pretty fancy, much more fancy than I would have expected or normally ordered. This is not a photo of the foiled copy. Anyways, taking pictures of a foil is always a pain. Been using a digital copy for most of my images in this one. This is a pretty cool cover. That's the one that's standard, more or less, from what I understand. Even though the costume for our heroine is a little bit, well, actually quite a bit more sexy than what we have in the interior art. I really like the interior costume a lot more than this one. I mean, it's nice. It's a bit over the top here, but not something that I would be hunting for personally. The cover itself is really cool, and it does just show the bit of a cyberpunk feel to it. Perfectly reasonable and attractive, and would get people to buy the book on the shelves. The Nyobi branding is pretty standard. You'll see that in most of those books. Something to make it a little bit more punchy would help maybe, but honestly, it's really not a big deal. There's not much here to change. Maybe I would have put the Outbreak in a bright yellow color or something like that. Bit of a transition from the purple to another complementary color rather than white. As far as the book itself, it's a nice cardstock cover. And I have another copy of the cover underneath. I think that's part of the ordering error when the book was done recently. It was a reedition. Paper is gloss and great quality. What I expect from indie comics from Kickstarter. This is a perfectly legit book. You get a nice set of ads at the end of this book. They're all in a nice ad package at the end rather than in between different pages. Makes things a little bit easier. We get the ad for Mary Machine Gun Lupus Venari, which came in March 2023 from what it says there. And I do have that particular image twice, just because of how the thing was printed. We get the ad for Outbreak Part 2, early 2023. That's done. I've got it. I'll probably review it, like I said. Pretty nice ad. Getting an ad as well for Peter Vasquez for commission covers, pinup painting, inks, sketch covers. All sorts of things. Nice to have that kind of ad in a book. Just promotes that particular artist just a bit more than just putting their name in the credits at the start. Get an ad for Tibby, which looks really, really weird, but reading the full title, I'm pretty sure that is intentional. This is something that I might want to look into. I really don't know where to find that. I'd have to look for it specifically. We're going to spend a bit of time here talking about costumes and such, because the art itself, if you've seen Origins before, it's in the same vein. It's a very 90s style and a very 90s look for a lot of the characters, and it works really well. We're just going to go into a little bit more of the specifics, just to have a good idea. We've got like the main costumes of like 4 of the characters in this one picture. Nyobi's costume, I really like. It's simple enough. The jacket is pretty good. It has a design on the back that adds to its presence. Plaid skirt actually is better than a plain skirt. Here it just gives a little bit more depth. The bodice is actually pretty good as well, much better than the bra that we have in the cover. Everything on it actually looks really functional, which is what we would want in those superhero costumes most of the time. Sybil's costume is also really good. A little bit the exact same of what we saw in Origins. It just has a bit more of a feminine figure in this particular book, I think. Not sure if it's just the positioning and just how much we see of the costume as opposed to what we had in Origins. Do like a good cape. Capes are really nice in comics, and they do give a lot of depth to a character, and they give a decent amount of work to the artist. And here, the cape actually works like it should, which is always a plus. Catcall's costume is also really nice. It has as well a lot of depth with that hexagon pattern on the bodice. The leg armor also is pretty good. The arm armor is also pretty good. It just has enough depth and enough details to it to make it interesting, which is a thing that is sometimes missing in modern superhero costumes, if you ask me. A lot of those modern costumes are very much closer to what we have with Keats. And I would say here, it's one of those costumes that it's one of those things that wear the made-for-cosplayer costume that you have a lot with DC and Marvel nowadays. It's not terrible, but this one actually lacks depth compared to the others. Don't think it's supposed to be a costume. I mean, it is or more or less her street clothes. And she does look the look of a creepy goth chick, but it could have used a little bit more. Maybe the choker should have been replaced by a necklace, maybe a band or something in the air. Just something to give it a little bit more depth than black on white. The tattoo actually gives it just that little bit more that you need, but it's still lacking in my opinion. We do have very nice and dynamic action scene, and most of them last more than one panel, which is a big problem in modern comics. They're not the longest and the most elaborate action scenes that I've seen, but they fit what is needed here in the format that we're dealing with as a floppy. Backgrounds are not the best in this one, but it's not really that they're not the best. It's just that a lot of time they're absent. You do have a lot of the standard shortcuts being used to simplify the arts, which works fairly well. The background characters, however, are generally really good. The goons that are rioting, they're all different, which is very, very nice. Having had a bunch of same-face characters in DC and Marvel recently, it's nice to have this variety here in the faceless, nameless grunts. So there's a balance here. Maybe the backgrounds are not the best, but the characters in the background and the surrounding things are actually really good. What backgrounds we do have are pretty good overall. I do like the skyline shot here of Drake Tech's headquarters. Same with the big panel of TVs here. It's not the most details, but it gives you what you need in order to understand what is going on, which is really, really nice. Panel work in this is very functional and actually imaginative. You've got variety page over page. It's not blocky or it's not all over the place. Makes it fun to read and easy to read. It isn't confusing like it's sometimes get in some indie books, especially the more esoteric ones. So this is a big plus, in my opinion. So now I chew the flowers. Now it's time for the pot. Not quite what it is, but I'll be a little bit more critical on the story elements here because there's a lot of things that I have a few issues with. Part of it, though, is actually really good. Here we've got a riot to try to get more acceptance for the G-Noms. People decide that burning down city and causing massive health crisis and all sorts of things is the best way around to do it. I would have said a few years ago that this is absolutely stupid and unrealistic. And then we saw the Summer of Love, and we now realize just how stupid people really are. So this is actually quite realistic in a weird way, which I do not appreciate, but that's me not appreciating real life, not what is written in the book. We are not given much depth to the bad guy's plan here. All we really know is that Drake Tech wants those riots for some reason. If it was just a profiteering company, I mean, I would look at this as a RoboCop kind of situation, let the city burn and buy it off on cheap and rebuild it. I have a feeling Drake Tech might be a little bit more involved and a little bit more in-depth here with the G-Noms. We're really not sure because it's not explained here, which is a bit of an issue. One thing that is nice, though, is that Nyobi is working really well with her allies. Sybil is a little bit over the top in how she acts. Catcall seems to be a very important part of the team, just in taking care of the simple situations rather than a more complex one. And Nyobi is pretty much the face of the team. So this is a functional team that does what it's supposed to do, and that seems to be well oiled, which is not a thing we always see in these types of comics. On the other hand, I have no idea what Drake Tech is. We saw them in Origins. I think we saw a future version of Miss Drake. But since we don't have the baggage of, let's say, a lot of other comics or short stories or actual novels telling us like what is actually going on, this would work really well in a long-going, ongoing series where we know like the different characters and the different people working. But here, if we just look at the text we are given, we're missing that important bit of information about that organization and that company. As I said here, a lot of what is going on here would work really well in those long-running series. Those have hundreds, thousands of books in the backlog, and they have a common idea of who those characters are. People who can grab those books and will know more or less, let's say, who Professor X is, who Magneto is. Even if they just watched a cartoon, just watched the movies, they'd have a good idea of what's going on. Here we're missing this particular level of depth, and it's not something that's easy to just put in. Because if you start doing info dumps and things like that on all of the characters, you're going to lose the readers. But if you don't have that information, the readers are not going to have the reference material that they need to be able to piece things together. Another thing that I'm not a huge fan of is that this is the same book as Birthright. Not the exact same thing. The backstory and everything is different. But the whole idea behind it is, once again, there's a riot and there's people that are against G-Noms and for G-Noms and everything. It's not as interesting as you might think. This is nice things to have in middle issues or as an arc in a longer book. But here, since each book is its own thing and they're released not as frequently as you would have like a lot of DC Marvel books, you lose some of that depth and it's not as interesting as you might think. One thing I do like, though, is Cinder acting like a victim through the start of the book here, and then acting like a total psychopathic terrorist, which is very believable once you start looking at the whole social justice movement that we've been dealing with for the past close to 10 years now. I do like how the police is represented at first in this book as people trying to do their work and trying to protect the city and protect the people. But when they arrest Keats at the end, they sound really pathetic, and when Keats does her ACAB bullshit talk, the cops don't seem to respond like they should to these kinds of situations. Those two cops there just seem to act like those mean stereotypical cops that we see in a lot of comics nowadays, which is very annoying because it's an overdone trope. We've already covered the two first points I've put on here, and I would say that the story is well set up, and we don't waste much time on any real big exposition, which is pretty good in that particular format. But really, in the end, what we're missing is that it's not a full story. We really get the introduction. I understand the format we're using here as a floppy, but these kinds of stories, which seem to have a very finite point, I mean, it starts somewhere and it'll end somewhere, would be much better served in a graphic novel type of format. Something, you say you've got 4 issues for this, you just compile it in a single book, the whole thing together, and publish it as that, rather than 4 floppies that'll release like once a year over 4 years. You won't be able to keep people's interest for that long. People who get book 1, well, you might entice them to get book 2, but if there is anything that disconnects them from your book, they will not follow through on the second campaign and the third campaign and the fourth campaign, which is the big problem with these forms of crowdfunded books. Honestly, there's a big discussion going on all over the place in regards to the format and should floppies still be around, etc. I do think floppies have their place in the marketplace, but if you want to be doing floppies, you need to be releasing them at a very steady pace, far more than once a year, mostly. And that's a problem that we have with a lot of indie comics in the crowdfunding sphere. Another thing that's both fun and annoying is that there's multiple Nyobi stories going on at the same time. There's another one starting very soon with Nyobi Pinguina. It's fun to learn of multiple stories with the character, but I would rather get one full series done, then we move to the next series, then we move to the next series. So we actually see the character grow or see the character in a full story, rather than having tidbits here and there which don't connect as well as things can be. The whole G-Nom crisis is a thing that I will still have problems with and problems identifying with personally. Same with all of the X-Men stuff. We've already talked about it in Nyobi Origins. I made a big rant in that particular video, but it really feels like an easy crutch in a lot of those stories rather than something that should be fun and very different, which isn't as inspired as a lot of people think. Original Doom Patrol stuff where they were freaks and people accepted them as freaks is actually more interesting nowadays. I still think it's a fun book in the end, especially now that issue 2 is released. You do get a lot more explanations in issue 2, which we will cover really soon. With Nyobi being released through Antarctic Press, you have a good chance of getting these kinds of books at a fair and steady rate at your local comic shop. I just hope this OR can be resolved quickly so we get to know more about the Nyobi universe and move forward with the character. So I thank you very much for listening to me today. I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day. Keep on reading comics. Keep on enjoying them. I'll keep reviewing and analyzing them, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.